Why is it important that we protest against it?
No, it's very, very important because what's happening in WA right now happened all along the East Coast 150 years ago. So when we talk about transgenerational trauma and how they're feeling right now, we've been feeling like that for the last 150 years. We took the whole full brunt of invasion and assimilation. So as we said earlier, we have a responsibility and an obligation to stand up for our mob when our mob's in need. And that's what we're doing today. That's what Brisbane did today. That's what Sydney did today. Melbourne, Adelaide, Perth, and all the small country towns and small towns throughout Australia did. They had an obligation, and that was to stand up for our mob. Now we'll continue to do that.
And you talked there about trauma of dispossession, assimilation, all these sorts of things. Do you think there's something about the lives that those people are living out in those communities which is in some way better than the ones that are being lived in communities on the East Coast? Or?
No, well, to an extent, yeah, because a lot of them mob are still living on country and live in traditional ways, but then there's a lot of mob that live in homelands that are being deprived, by basic human rights, which is water, which is food, which is clean water, they're getting deprived from that, and that's what's happening here, all throughout the East Coast in these urbanised cities is, mobs being deprived, from water and from food, and I think that's what we've got to start to realise is that this is continuing to happen, on a national scale, and if we don't get up and do anything, these fellas are going to get a continent for free, so I think it's up to us. It's very, very important to mirror what our old fellas did back in the 70s, the 60s and the 80s and the early 90s, and that's civil disobedience. We need to get out there and we need to, voice our opinion, because most of the times when we hear people talking about our issues, they're either white fellas or they're politicians and they're getting pulled by the string, so what we saw today, was, like we asked, what do we want to do? They said we want to block the road, so we blocked the road. Then we said, what do we want to do? They said we want to march, so we marched. We said, what are we going to do? We said we're going to fight. And the reasons why, that's the people saying that. That's none of us putting any words in their mouths. That's the people saying that. When the people start to get up and get in numbers like that there, that's when we can start making real change. But we've got to continue this. We can't do this in isolated pockets around the nation and on single dates. We've got to normalise this. Like I said about the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, it was normal, to put your fist up and say Black Power. It was normal, to march and to, stand in the way of police officers, that are brutalising people. It was normal, to resist. We've got to make a culture of resistance, that is normalised. And we've got to work out what is good and what is working for us, and then we've got to start working with it, as a whole and as a collective.
Okay, and do you think there's something different about Aboriginal forms of protest to, say, the Black Power movement in the US or civil rights movement over there?
I don't know. Yeah, it is a bit different. One thing, the difference is with the Black Power movement, with the Africans in the United States, is we still have a connection to country. And if you look throughout history, like physically, we've never been, a violent people. But when it comes down to it, we will. Of course we will. Just like anybody else will. But the main thing is, that we're trying to do is bring that message, by all means, of protesting, demonstrating, and that's what we've got to keep doing. And it is different, because not one thing is the same, and that's what we've got to realise when we talk about other movements, that Africans were dispossessed, from their continent, they're uprooted, and taken, as slaves, to another nation. We still hold our connection. When we talk about resistance and when we talk about decolonisation, we must talk about it in the light of the Native Americans, and the indigenous peoples in Canada and South America. They're fighting a cause of anti-colonial and decolonisation, and that's what we need to, tie ourselves up with, because, African Americans, wasn't a fight of, of what we're doing. It was more of a fight of, to be, equal and to be just and to, be fair and to be treated fairly. We don't want equality in this country, because Australia never gave it to us. We don't want, rights in this country, that are dictated by the terms, of, the Australian government, because it's not going to get there. And once we realise that we don't need it, then we will start to realise how powerful we are as a people, and that's the road that we've got to take. Like the 60s and 70s, like in 1988, there was 45,000 Aboriginal people that descended on Musgrave Park for a bicentennial. Now, if we can get there, in another 5 to 10 years, then we can push, a real question, instead of constitutional recognition, we can push a question of independence. We can push a question of, we want, a separate state. We can push a question of treaty, but there's a road that we need to take before we get there. What's that road? That road is us standing together and it's us fighting. And yeah, it's we've got to just stay constant, and we've got to stay on the ball, and we've got to just keep fighting and fighting and fighting.
And when you're talking about making the state irrelevant, the states, don't listen to the state. What could replace it? What sort of system do you think would be a good replacement for it?
The system that we had, we lived, here with 500 nations. If we want to talk in white terms, we lived here for over 60,000 years, in peace, in harmony, with 500 other nations. These are 500 nations that have different languages, different creation stories, different spiritual beliefs. Like the spiritual beliefs was the same, but the story was told differently. We coexisted for over 60,000 years, on this continent, with each other. I don't know how many people are on the UN, they can't sit down with each other without arguing. We coexisted. There was a law that governed all of us, and that was the law of the land. And that was a relationship that we had with the land and with each other, that we must get back to. And that's just not a law that we had here. That's a law that every Indigenous person has around the world. And the way we, I guess, it's it's a big ask, to go back that far. But we've got to keep fighting for something, and like I was saying, there's these calls of treaty, independence, a separate state, but before we get to those, we're going to, ask that question of, how many steps it's going to take and which direction we're going to go, and today, that's how we do that, as we, get the masses of Aboriginal people and non-Aboriginal people together, marching down the road, talking about how we're going to get there, and that's where it starts.